Veterans, let me start with something that might sting a little. The VA loves to deny sleep apnea claims, and their favorite excuse is to blame everything on obesity. You've probably heard it before. You file for sleep apnea, the VA sends you that CMP exam, and what do they say? Well, you're overweight, so that's the cause. Stamp denied. End of story. But here's what they won't tell you. PTSD can absolutely cause or aggravate sleep apnea. And if you understand how to argue that connection and present it in the VA's own language, you can win that claim. Now, I know some of you are already skeptical. Maybe you've been denied once, twice, or maybe even 3 times. Maybe the VA told you flat out there's no medical evidence linking PTSD and sleep apnea. Or maybe your VSO even said, don't bother, it won't work. But here's the thing, that's just not true. The medical literature is clear. PTSD rewires your brain and nervous system. It changes your sleep architecture. It throws your fight or flight response into overdrive. So even when you're trying to rest, your body is on red alert. And all that makes sleep apnea even worse. Or, for many veterans, it's what causes it in the first place. So let me be blunt. If you keep accepting the VA's obesity excuse, you're going to be losing. But if you flip the script and understand how PTSD and sleep apnea really connect, you'll see why veterans across the country are winning these claims. So let me be blunt. If you keep accepting the VA's obesity excuse, you're going to keep losing. But if you flip the script and understand how PTSD and sleep apnea really connect, you'll see why veterans across the country are winning these claims. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. I'm going to break down the science, the strategy, and the exact words the VA needs to see so you can finally stop hearing denied and start hearing approved. Here's how it works. To get service connected for sleep apnea, you've got to check 3 boxes. A current diagnosis, and this has to come from a sleep study, not just your spouse saying you snore. The VA requires objective evidence, usually in the form of a sleep study, that will result in either CPAP, BiPAP, or another prescribed treatment. Without that, you don't even get out of the gate. You also need evidence that it's caused or aggravated by a service-connected condition. In this case, we're talking about PTSD. That means showing how your PTSD either triggered the onset of your sleep apnea or made existing sleep apnea worse. And lastly, a Nexus opinion connecting the two. A medical opinion written in VA-friendly language that ties your sleep apnea directly to your PTSD. Without this piece, the VA almost always defaults to blaming obesity. Now, here's where the veteran runs into trouble. The VA has historically been resistant to linking PTSD and sleep apnea. Their fallback is always, you're overweight, so that's the cause. But the reality is much more complicated, and the science backs it up. So let's break it down. PTSD triggers chronic hyperarousal. That means your sympathetic nervous system, the part that controls your fight or flight response, gets stuck in the on position. So instead of resting at night, your brain is wired, scanning for danger. That leads to fragmented sleep cycles, higher rates of central and obstructive sleep apnea, and reduced oxygen saturation. On top of that, PTSD often causes nightmares, panic attacks, and insomnia, which further disrupts sleep. Many veterans with PTSD grind their teeth at night, clench their jaw, or experience airway collapse from tension, all of which make apnea worse. And then there's CPAP compliance. PTSD-related claustrophobia and hypervigilance often make it nearly impossible to tolerate that mask strapped to your face, which complicates the treatment. And if that wasn't enough, the medications prescribed for PTSD, SSRIs, antipsychotics, sleep aids, they often contribute to weight gain and muscle relaxation, which are additional risk factors for sleep apnea. So even when obesity does play a role, you can still show that the root cause is PTSD and its treatment. This isn't speculation. Multiple studies, including large VA cohort studies, have shown that veterans with PTSD are 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with sleep apnea than veterans without PTSD. That's not coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's cause and effect. The problem isn't whether the link exists. The problem is whether you frame it in a way the VA is forced to recognize it. And that's what we're going to talk about. Here's why this matters so much. If you don't connect your sleep apnea to your PTSD, you're not just missing out on a percentage increase, you're leaving life-changing benefits on the table. What does that look like in real life? It means you're paying out of pocket for your CPAP supplies every year, you're fighting the healthcare system for treatment approvals, you're struggling with poor sleep, constant fatigue, headaches, and cardiovascular problems the VA refuses to acknowledge as a service-related condition. And while you're living with all that, the VA gets to save money by denying your claim. But when you win this connection, everything changes. Sleep apnea, when rated, is typically 50% if you're prescribed a CPAP machine. That's a huge rating by itself. And when you stack on top of your PTSD rating, it can push you from 50 to 70% or 70 to 100%. That's not just a number. That's thousands of dollars a month, access to better care, and long-term security for your family. And it's more than just money. It's recognition. It's the VA finally saying, yes, your PTSD caused this. Yes, your suffering is real. And yes, we're going to stand behind you. I had a veteran once tell me, Doc, my PTSD was bad enough, but the apnea made me feel like I was dying in my sleep every night too. I'd wake up gasping. My wife was terrified next to me. And when the VA denied my claim, it felt like they were saying none of that even mattered. That kind of suffering deserves recognition. And when the VA denies you, it feels like they're saying your pain isn't real, your service did not count. But when you win, it's validation, it's stability, it's treatment you don't have to fight tooth and nail for. And it's a better quality of life, not just for you, but for the people who love you and who've been waking up scared in the middle of the night next to you. That's why this matters. The stakes aren't just percentages. They're your health, your family's peace of mind, and your dignity. Let me give you a story. I worked with a veteran, we'll call him John. John carried severe PTSD from multiple deployments. He had nightmares, panic attacks, and hypervigilance that meant he rarely slept more than a couple hours at a time. But it wasn't just him who suffered. His wife did too. She told me she would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of him choking, gasping, and sometimes being completely silent because he had stopped breathing. So she'd shake him, terrified he wasn't going to wake up. And then she'd lie there the rest of the night, wide awake, scared it would happen again. That's the hidden side of this. PTSD and sleep apnea don't just wreck the veteran, they wreck the family too. His wife wasn't just losing sleep. She was carrying the fear of losing her husband every night. So finally, John went in for a sleep study, and sure enough, severe obstructive sleep apnea. So he filed a claim, and what did the VA say? Denied. The reason? It's because you're overweight. Classic VA move. Blame the weight, ignore the service. But here's what we did. We pulled the medical literature. We documented how John's PTSD caused chronic insomnia and hyperarousal. We showed how his PTSD medications contributed to his weight gain, and we tied it all together with a strong Nexus letter. This letter made it clear. John's PTSD wasn't just sitting next to his sleep apnea, it was causing and aggravating it. This time, approved. He went from denial to a 50% for sleep apnea on top of his PTSD rating. And more importantly, his wife told me she finally felt like she wasn't carrying that fear alone anymore. That's the power of getting it right. It's not just about the veteran, it's about giving the whole family a chance to breathe again. First things first, you cannot win a sleep apnea claim without a formal sleep study, period. Snoring is not enough. Daytime fatigue is not enough. Even your spouse saying you stopped breathing at night, I thought you were going to die in your sleep, is still not enough. The VA doesn't care about stories alone. They want objective medical evidence, and that comes from a sleep study. That's where they hook you up, monitor your breathing, your oxygen levels, your sleep cycles, and prove it on paper that you actually have sleep apnea. Without that report in black and white, the VA will deny you before your claim even leaves the runway. Here's why this matters. Sleep apnea is one of the few conditions where the VA rating is very straightforward. If a doctor prescribes you a CPAP machine after a sleep study, that's usually an automatic 50% rating. But you can't get there unless you've got the study on file. And let me be clear, just having a CPAP in your bedroom doesn't cut it. The VA will ask, where's the study? Where's the diagnosis? So no study, no service connection. So if you've been putting it off, or if your provider has brushed you off with, you probably have apnea. Push for that test. Demand it. Because until you've got that official sleep study in your records, your claim doesn't even get to first base. If this is resonating with you right now, I want you to hit that subscribe button. This is exactly the kind of insider strategy we break down every week to help veterans win their claims. Next, don't just rely on your PTSD diagnosis and assume the VA will connect the dots for you. You have to spell out exactly how PTSD wrecks your sleep. Think about it. Nightmares, insomnia, panic attacks, hypervigilance, night sweats, waking up in a full adrenaline rush, these aren't just side effects of PTSD. They're direct contributors to sleep apnea. If your body is constantly in fight or flight, your nervous system never calms down enough to restore sleep. Think about it. Nightmares, insomnia, panic attacks, hypervigilance, night sweats, waking up in a full adrenaline rush. These aren't just side effects of PTSD. They're direct contributors to your sleep apnea. If your body is constantly in fight or flight mode, your nervous system can never calm down enough to get restorative sleep. That agitation makes your airway more likely to collapse, your breathing becomes more irregular, and your apnea more severe. And it doesn't stop there. PTSD also makes CPAP compliance harder. A lot of veterans can't tolerate a mask strapped to their face at night because it triggers flashbacks, panic, or claustrophobia. I've had veterans telling me, hey, I wanted to use a CPAP, but the second I put it on, I felt like I was back overseas with a gas mask in a firefight. That's the reality, and if you don't put it in writing, the VA will ignore it. Then there's the meds. Many PTSD medications like SSRIs, antipsychotics, sleep aids, they're all known to cause weight gain, muscle relaxation, and even airway changes. And that's the VA's favorite excuse for denying apnea: obesity. So don't let them use that against you without context. If your meds contributed to your weight gain and worsened your apnea, you need to point that out, because that means your apnea is still connected to your PTSD. The more details you put on the record, the harder it is for the VA to shrug and say, not service-connected. You're building a chain, piece by piece, showing how PTSD set off the dominoes that led straight to sleep apnea. Now here's the golden ticket. The single most important piece of evidence you can bring to the table is your Nexus letter. And here's why. You can have the diagnosis from a sleep study, you could have your PTSD service-connected, and you could even explain how one led to the other. But unless a medical professional puts that connection into writing, in the VA's language, your claim will almost always get denied. A Nexus letter is a written medical opinion from a physician or psychologist that says, in plain terms, it is at least as likely as not that the veteran's sleep apnea was caused or aggravated by their service-connected PTSD. That phrase, at least as likely as not, is the key that unlocks your claim. It's the legal standard the VA uses, not 100%, not beyond a reasonable doubt, just 50-50. If the evidence is equally balanced, the veteran always wins by law. So without a Nexus letter, the VA will default to a rushed C&P exam. And let's be honest, too many of those are 15-minute appointments where the examiner barely looks up from the computer before typing, veteran sleep apnea is most likely due to obesity. Case closed, denied. But when you come armed with a solid nexus from a doctor who understands VA claims, you shift the balance in your favor. You're no longer relying on the VA's examiner. You put medical evidence on the record that they are required to consider. And here's the thing. Not all doctors know how to write these Nexus letters correctly. If your doctor writes, PTSD could be related to sleep apnea, that's pretty much useless. If they say, it's possible, the VA is going to throw it out. You need that exact phrase, at least as likely as not. Anything weaker than that, and the VA will treat it like it doesn't exist. I've seen veterans go from multiple denials to approvals just by adding a proper Nexus letter. That's how powerful it is. So don't roll the dice on the VA's opinion alone. Get a strong Nexus letter in the right language from a provider who knows what they're doing. That's what turns a weak claim into a winnable one. And just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm Dr. Marshall Bahr. I'm an Army Ranger, disabled combat veteran, and a physician. I've lived this life. I've seen the toll PTSD and sleep apnea take on veterans, and I've made it my mission to make sure you don't get left behind by a system that's way too good at saying no. So let's bring this home. Can you get service-connected for sleep apnea secondary to PTSD? The answer is absolutely yes, if you build it the right way. Here's the roadmap one last time. You need a formal sleep study. That's your foundation. No study, no claim. You need to document exactly how PTSD impacts your sleep. The nightmares, hypervigilance, insomnia, panic attacks, medication side effects, all of it. Paint the full picture. And finally, you need a strong Nexus letter that ties the two together in the VA's own language. It is at least as likely as not the veteran's PTSD caused or aggravated their sleep apnea. When you've got those three pieces lined up, you can finally cut through the VA's excuses, shut down the obesity argument, and get the rating you deserve. And remember, sleep apnea often means a 50% rating out the gate. That can be life-changing when it stacks with your other conditions. But this is bigger than just numbers. Winning this claim is about recognition. It's about the VA finally saying, yes, your PTSD didn't just affect your mind. It's wrecked your sleep and your health, and we're going to acknowledge that. That validation matters. For you, for your family, for the nights your spouse sat awake terrified you weren't going to start breathing again. Now, here's where we go next. The question I get all the time is, hey doc, how do I claim MST, military sexual trauma? That's one of the toughest topics we'll cover, but also one of the most important. MST claims are often denied because veterans don't know what evidence the VA is really looking for. In the next video, I'm going to walk you step by step through how to file an MST claim, what evidence counts, even if it's not in your service records, and how to overcome the VA's wall of denials. So don't go anywhere. Click over to that video now, because if sleep apnea secondary to PTSD is about being believed, MST claims are about reclaiming your voice. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I'll see you there.